podcast. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with my co-hosts, Michael Grothy and Ben Bateman. I'm raising the roof because they're my roof. We are a podcast that focuses on Magic the Gathering Modern and all types of Magic-related content. Today, we are doing our top 10 cards from the most recent set, Kaldheim, wearing an awesome shirt we got from Wizards. There's like a boombox over there, or like an amp and some other cool stuff for the review.
I should be wearing it. I've got mine right down here. I don't know, what am I doing? I should have it on.
We could wait.
It's foolish.
Do you want to go put it on?
No, I don't particularly want to change in the middle of the episode, right. But thank you, Wizards, for sending me a swag box. It's very cool.
Yeah. It comes with like a cool concert badge. It was really sweet and very nice of them. Doing a top 10 countdown of our favorite cards for Modern specifically. This set's really cool. The vibe of it is sweet. It's always interesting when tribal sets or sets with the tribal focus exist, because like for competitive play, does one of the tribes have a chance of seeing play? Yes, then like half the cards are going to be relevant. If the answer is no, then half of the cards are like, there's a bunch of giant cards that read really sweet and in standard are going to be dope, and in other formats maybe, but I'm like, I'm never gonna cast this card unless it's really good with Primeval Titan. I'm never gonna cast this card.
Uro is a giant.
That is fair.
Or Kroxa is a giant. But yes, the number of giants is so small that
the good giants are some of the best cards ever printed, but I don't know if any of the giants cards are that good with them. So
yeah, I mean, I didn't put it on any of my lists, but there's that blue like kind of like telling time that you can cast from your graveyard also if you have a giant, and like, man, that card's pretty sweet. It's very cool, but like, unless you're playing a shapeshifter, you're pretty much never going to have a giant unless it's Uro.
So we are going to be counting down. The way this is going to work is me, Ben, and Michael each have our top 10 lists. I have mine right in front of us. They are secret. We have not told each other what they are. We're going to walk through and walk them down. And then we are going to count those down. Then we're going to go and do an honorable mention where we battle them off. And then on Twitter, you can go and vote for your favorite or comment below, either one of each of the different things, and we'll tally it. And then on the next episode, we'll say who won the most wins. Ben, I think, is currently 1-12 or something historically, though we stopped paying attention to it.
I think you're remembering that backwards, if I had to be honest with you.
Definitely not backwards. You might have won 2.
I don't know.
I might give you a second one, maybe.
I have strong memories of winning upwards of 11, maybe even as many as 12. So I don't know. That's just the way I remember it, but it's okay.
11%, right? That's
as a quick aside and reminder to everybody here, we are not including any land cards on this because we did our review of all of the sweet land cards in the Modern format as our little mini episode of the Masters of Modern, actually on the YouTube channel. So if you're listening to this on audio and you don't ever go and check out the YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/the MMcast. You can see our full review of all of the land cards in the set. We break them all down for you, as well as the fact that we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/the MMcast, where you can get a full raw feed. There's a whole sweet conversation that happens right before this about the OC, Alex Chew Toys, Bone Broth, wild stuff going on in there. So go check that out as well.
And it's now video format, so you get it actually a whole week early. So literally, as soon as I record this, I upload it as an unlisted video on YouTube, and it gets posted to Patreon. So you can go watch this now. In fact, if you're watching this, you probably could just watch next week's episode right now as well. If you go donate to Patreon, I think it's $5 or above. Also, big shout out to David Celestok, who is in the Noble House of Modern. Thumbs up to you.
Salute
Sorry,
to you, David.
Pinkies
Big
up.
thumbs up. Pinkies up.
Sorry, pinkies up. If you donate to the Exalted tier or above, you get shout outs every episode. So thank you, David, for jumping on the Modern House train. It's fancy here. We wear suits or band shirts.
I spent a lot of time not wearing suits on this show, even though I did for years. Now I'm wearing a jacket. I'm sort of feeling like I want to go back to that one again. So maybe I'll be doing more jackets.
We ventured away from competitive Magic. We did some casual stuff. You got a little more casual. Now that we're back to Modern, you're a little bit more buttoned up. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. And it's my birthday in like 2 days, and Michael's birthday yesterday in the time of when this video is being released. So happy birthday, Michael.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Alex.
Thank you.
So who is going to start? Who will go? Who will venture first with their number 10 card?
Ben, you're 1 through 2. Michael is 3 through 4. I'm 5 through 6. 1. It's Ben, you're first. So we'll go Ben, Michael, me.
I'm going to start out with card number 10 on my list. The card is Egon, God of Death. Egon is a 6/6 Death Touch legendary creature god for black and 2. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice Egon and draw a card. Now, on the backside, Egon is a legendary artifact for 1 black. Beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. And for black and 2, you can tap it to exile a creature card from your graveyard, draw a card. Here's what draws me to this card so much. The front side of this card reads 6/6 Death Touch creature for 3. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard, and if you can't, sack it to draw a card. So you're telling me that worst case scenario, I'm getting a 6/6 Death Toucher for 3 that I'm just going to sacrifice to draw a card the next turn. I'll cycle this card if I can't do anything with it.
And you fog, right? Like their death touch, they can't attack into your death touching 6/6 very profitably.
It's a 6/6, and it's exile 2 cards. Like they can be any 2 cards. So like fetch lands, like this card's dope. This card's really powerful. And also the fact that then the backside of it, because it's a 1 black thing that you can play later that's just gonna like generate you advantage. I don't know. I think this card's real good.
The fact that also like because of like this is going to be true of every god, but they skirt around the legendary rule a little bit because you can play the first half and then the second half. You don't have like so that if you draw multiples, they're not dead, unlike previous legendaries. Yeah, no, this card's sweet. Michael, anything?
Michael,
it could become the best 3-mana 6/6 in Modern.
Hey, if our last Masters of Modern episode comes true, which hopefully it does, yeah, it could be. You're right, maybe.
No, I mean, I think this card is cool. I do think 3-mana 6/6 is not as appealing as it used to be. Just because like the format's so fast, there's a lot of combo, there's a lot of ways to kill this that, you know, as the format gets bigger. Big dude for 2 or 3 mana has just fallen out of favor. Tarmogoyf has fallen out of favor. Although Death Shadow and its new friend are back in force. So I suppose there is something to be said for undercosted big dudes. So perhaps this guy is the truth.
I guess to finish off my thought on this before I throw it to you guys, Egon is just a 6/6 for 3 if you are able to exile the things. It's a 6/6 death touch for 3. There's no trample. There's no evasion. So if you do have a full graveyard and you can just exile cards, then you're just getting a good dude for 3, which is true. It's a fair point.
Yeah, and I think by turn 3, you can keep this alive for a few turns. And like you don't need a ton of turns with staying in play before your opponent is dead or way behind. So
that's my number 10.
And what's the second? So the front half is it mills a card every turn, and what's the other ability?
The other ability is a legendary artifact for 1 black. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card, and for black 2, tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, draw a card.
I think that's also pretty good. I mean, like
it made my list.
It's okay.
Card
to me, like that is an interesting option that you have with this. Like if your graveyard doesn't have enough cards, or if you feel like a 6/6 isn't going to do it for whatever reason, like you know your opponent has a removal spell in hand. But it's not the reason you're playing the card. You're playing the card to get a 3-mana 6/6. And then you have this backside that is relevant. It fuels future 6/6s, and it is good if you already have one in play. But it's not the reason you're playing it, I don't think.
All right, Michael, what is your number 10?
I actually didn't number mine, which was very foolish. So I have to pick one of these to be number 10. I'm going to go with Elvish Warmaster, which is the... Elvish Warmaster is a 2-mana 2/2, 1 and a green. Grizzly Bears. Elf Warrior, whenever one or more other elves enters a battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green Elf Warrior creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn, and then it has 5 green activation. Elves you control get +2/+2 and gain Death Touch until end of turn. It's an elf card. It is good with Heritage Druid because it just like makes random elves and poops them out onto the board. It's only once per turn. So it's like a little bit like a slow Dwynen's Elite, but it's like a little better at grinding. Like Dwynen's Elite is very explosive because you play it, you immediately get a 1/1. You got 2 elves on the board. You can tap them for mana with Heritage Druid or Arch Druid or whatever. But this is like a little grindier, which is cool. It also has an infinite mana outlet. If you like manage to make infinite mana, you can give all your elves +infinity, which is always a thing that is sometimes happening in elves. It can trigger once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn if you collected company or otherwise put an elf into play at instant speed, which is a little spicy. You cannot do it using the black-green land, because it's only as a sorcery, as we discussed in our lands episode.
This is on my list. It's a little higher on my list, so I'm going to wait to sound off on my thoughts until I get to it on my part of the list.
Yes, but I am not carefully numbering, so I didn't think very hard about this being number 10. But.
So this is not on my list. I don't love that it's only once per turn. I just think that elves needs to be a little bit more explosive. I think this playing as a 1 of in the deck is probably correct, right? Like especially because it's a deck that does take advantage of tutors to some extent. Having this available instead of 1 of the Dwynen's Elite is like fine, and the infinite mana sink is good. Yeah, I like this card.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anytime, I think it's aggressively costed enough that it is a consideration for elves. Whether the metagame shakes out that it's too slow or, you know, there's no room or whatever, fine, so be it. But like on its face, it looks like a card that I would think about trying out in my elf deck if I had one.
Yeah, I think that's fair. My number 10, and Michael, start numbering. Just this is your chance as I read all the card names and what they do. All right, I have picked Orvar the Allform. 3 in a blue, legendary creature, shapeshifter, 3/3, changeling. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. More importantly, when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. There are cards that had that second part of the text that are worse than this, that have seen a significant amount of play in Modern. Obviously, the more Liliana of the Veil is seeing in play, the better this card becomes. But the fact that we still live in a world where Liliana is seeing play, even when Jund is considered not good, and it's just top 5/0s and 5/0s dailies regularly, having this as an option to fight that is, I think, really valuable. On top of the fact that it is changeling, so its advantage with many different options and decks that you could be playing with it are really strong. And then just taking the fact that there's cool things you can do with its ability. If you want to actually lean into the front half and like do something really cool, you're targeting your stuff, being an infect or something else to do really cool effects, then there's just that whole extra layer. Though it is really the second half and the first ability of it being a changeling that's the most interesting to me. Changeling comes up a few times in my list, and that makes this relevant more so even, but here is the first card on the list.
This card didn't make my list. The big reason just being that I think it cost 4 on its front half, right? So I think just casting it on its own, what you're going to do with it is weak in the sense that, like, you know, what was that combo, the 4-mana red goblin, like Hadra or something like that? I can't remember what it is. It's like you copy it and it copies spells or something like that. There was some infinite combo you could do with it. But anyway, point being, anything that you have to cast for 4 that doesn't do anything right when you cast it, I think is a tough sell in Modern. So I think the front half is tough. I do think the back half is interesting, like as a sideboard card, that if they made you discard, because it's just copy a permanent, right? You can just like copy a land when you discard it. So like that's cool.
You can copy their Liliana of the Veil. It's any permanent.
Okay. Yeah. So that's cool. That's like a very interesting, cool thing to bring in out of a sideboard. But it didn't chart for me because the front half felt a little too like eh. But
you can also copy their Croxa, although you didn't escape yours, so it'll die immediately. But yeah, Croxa will also put this into play and is like a relevant Modern card.
Yeah.
I think clones, even that clone any permanent for 4, just don't do it for me. Like, there is some upside. And if you built a combo deck around this, because there are like infinite combos you can do with this. There's like a card from 10th edition that Frank Karsten mentioned in a Channel Fireball article or something. It's like a 1-mana aura that you can pay 1 to return to. Oh no, that's a different card. That's with the dragon. There was some combo with this. There are infinite combos you can do with this. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head anymore because I forgot. But yeah, it's cool. I just feel like 4 mana to clone something, a lot of times you're not going to be getting like 4 mana worth of value off of it, and so it's a little awkward to me.
Oh yeah, I am exclusively looking at this for the beginning half and the second half, as in like this is a merfolk that then I can use things that work with merfolk that target them, and then also if I ever get against a card that makes me discard cards, I can fight against that. Like a Croxa, right? Where like, yes, I don't think the middle half of these abilities, which are cool in Commander and other things, are relevant here, honestly.
My next card is Maskwood Nexus. We mentioned it on our episode last week. It combos with the Great Tree, I think is what it's called. This card is an artifact for 4 colorless. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you don't control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. And then for 3 and a tap, create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with changeling. So the reason this is on my list, obviously we already mentioned the one combo that's super, super sick, that like there is a combo, but it's, I think the idea that there are so many tribal, when X happens with this creature type, this thing happens, untap this thing, add this much mana type of deals that have happened over time, that this being colorless and interacting with every creature type, like I've thought about things like Conspiracy and Hivestone, cards like that over the years to try to like add into decks to like get some real spice. And this is that, except it can be played in any color, and it also has the ability to make a creature in the type necessary, which so often those decks are like, if you control this type of creature, tap and untapped, that type of thing. To me, this is like, I don't know what deck this goes into right away, but I think that this card is totally pushed in the sense that it's intended to interact with so many cool things. I know someone will find a way to break this card. I'm just positive. I look at this and it just feels like it's made to be broken.
It causes any, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it causes any effect that's like whenever an ally comes into play, make a 2/2 token. Like that card exists, right? It goes infinite with that. But anytime there's something like whenever this happens, make this other creature that doesn't trigger this, that effect goes infinite with this every time, right? And that gets printed pretty regularly, and I think this card does work with that.
So yeah, I don't know what it'll do necessarily yet. I've seen some people online talking about it, but to me, this is one of those cards that feels like every time they print creatures, this card is going to be dangerous.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, Arcane Adaptation, being a 3-mana enchantment, has this covered to me. I will say that because this is an artifact, it's on my honorable mentions actually, because I do think that it being an artifact could become relevant where you'd want to play it over Arcane Adaptation. Like if you are doing something with Karn the Great Creator, or I don't know, something that cares about artifacts, you can search for it with War of Invention, or I don't know. I mean, all these are weird cards to put in your tribal deck, but Magic's a big game and it's only getting bigger. And I feel like this card definitely is a card to keep an eye on because there will be some sort of combo with it at least a casual level. And the fact that it's an artifact and colorless could be relevant.
I think the fact that it's colorless allows it to be in more like Arcane Adaptation, like you were forced to play blue, right? So like the fact that you don't, like the decks that most want this are green and white decks that often don't need blue. And the fact that you're forcing yourself to play blue for an enchantment that doesn't do anything but just says wins the game on it maybe makes it less playable to me. I think that it also, with a card that is much higher on my list, which is Pyre of Heroes, makes this card like super interesting because that is this card goes with Pyre of Heroes, turns Pyre of Heroes on into a full-on birthing pod or better, and then also allows you to like get the infinite combo piece, right? It's a part of that infinite combo, which then those are 2 artifacts that Karn can look for. Like I think there's a puzzle here to be solved. This card's also in my honorable mentions it's on my honorable mentions mostly because of my first top 10 list was all changeling cards, and I realized that might be problematic for an interesting episode. And I was hoping you would include it. Same with the elf cards. But yeah, cool. The card's great. I really love this card.
On you, Michael.
My number 9 is Righteous Valkyrie. It is a 2 and a white angel cleric, 2/4, flying. Whenever another angel or cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. As long as you have at least 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. They keep printing more and more life gain payoff cards to the point where a life gain deck like Soul Sisters or even something else like a cleric tribal, like stuff like that is only getting better and better. And creatures you control get +2/+2 is kind of exactly what you want, because in order to make a deck like that work, you're playing like a bunch of doofy 1/1s like Ariok Champion and Soul Warden, and this isn't legendary, so you can have multiples of these in play. You can hit it off Collected Company. It's inexpensive. You can get it back with Sun Titan if you're doing like a Proclamation of Rebirth, like a bigger life gain deck where like maybe you are playing Sun Titan or Emiria or whatever. And yeah, just having like 1 or even 2 of these in play, you're like all your random 1/1s to make your deck work are now like freaking huge. And so this is like a 1-card win condition for only 3 mana. It also dodges Bolt, which is pretty good. It's harder to push because of its 3 mana. So it's like 2/4 for 3 is in an interesting spot in Modern because it dodges a lot of the removal, at least a little bit. This thing's ability to gain life is not super duper relevant, but if clerics become more of a thing, or if there is a theoretical life gain deck that wants to play like Resplendent Angel or something, then you're gaining a lot of life.
Where I see this card is that I think so often cards like this that are the like cool 3-drop creature with like sweet payoff ability, they're often just like not quite good enough to really catch my interest. This one's just good enough. The 4 toughness is I think a big part of it for Modern, where I'm gonna like look at this card most of the time and be like, I have to deal with that. Right. But then it's going to be like, oh, I have to deal with all the cards in your deck. And this is a threat that's going to just like win the game for you anyway. It's a really good piece to add to that deck is the point. It just adds some inevitability to that deck that I think is really powerful. And I agree with you. They keep focusing on the life gain payoff. So I like this card. Didn't make my list.
Yeah, card is very sweet. I think there's a lot of cool life gain stuff that keeps getting better and better, and Wizards keeps leaning into that space, partially because I think they're pushing white for reasons that the internet understands. And white life gain is a thing that is classically bad, but has the resources to be good, and leaning into it more and more has the chance of creating more and more powerful effects.
Yeah, I mean, incidental life gain like often is what pushes a card over the top because it seems so innocuous. But something like Uro, the fact that it gains you life means that you can't try and race under Uro very easily because it's gaining your opponent 6 life.
Right, exactly.
Because it gains them 3 life on the way in, and it gains them 3 more life when they unearth it or whatever. Yeah, just that incidental life gain like makes that card way better. So I think, they're kind of realizing, if you can gain life for free and or get paid off for gaining life, then that is one of White's strengths that you can play into.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ban Uro. What do you got, Alex?
My number 9 is Vorticlex. For those who don't know what this big boy does, he is Vorticlex, Monstrous Raider, 4 green legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, 6/6 trample haste. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. If an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. The main place I'm thinking of this card is in just like the Planeswalker I win through Ultimates, and there's now enough green ones that literally let you tutor for any creature in your deck, so you can find Vorticlex if you don't have it already, or you eventually find Emrakul and win the game. And that alone is really cool. And then that doesn't get into the fact that there's enough like cool +1/+1 counters and other things that go in. It is the top end of a combo deck. I don't think the reason this didn't make it higher on my list, because it's extremely powerful, is the fact that it's a 6-drop, and that just has its own limitations. But it does have haste, and it does have trample, so those are like, everything on the card reads like it's playable in Modern, other than the fact that it's a 6-drop.
Are you talking about like the doubling season deck?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
The fact that doubling season is a much harder to tutor for enchantment that nothing interacts with and does nothing when you cast it, and this is for 1 more mana, a creature threat that will kill them by itself, and maybe randomly hates out cards that they're playing, and then is also tutorable with every good tutor in Modern, is the thing that pushes that deck over for me. And there was a while where that deck was playing like Doubling Season and Jace, but then if you look at it's the red-green, gotta go fast.
Samit the Tested.
Yeah, has the ability to go to get you a Vorticlex and play and keep that train going. So
I was playing that deck. On Moto for a little while. I had built my own version of it. It's pretty fun. Yeah, I agree. Vorticlex is a nice top end for that. The thing I want to do with Vorticlex, I mentioned this on our episode, I want to Tooth and Nail and Twine for Vorticlex and Putrefax. I just want to attack, and then Putrefax just doubles counters because of Vorticlex and just wins the game outright. Pretty sick.
It's a flavor win, too.
yeah, that's true.
I agree that Vorticlex is a boon for that deck. I personally think that deck is cool, but not that good. So it did not make my list. But Vorticlex is definitely a cool card. And it is interesting that they have printed something like this into Standard again, because Standard and Historic and Pioneer and cards were doubling formats that are a little bit smaller, a little bit weaker, where doubling season doesn't exist. It will definitely be interesting to see if they can make it work.
My next card is going to be Nico Heiress. Blue-white X for Planeswalker with 3 loyalty. When Nico enters the battlefield, create X shard tokens. Shards are enchantments, each with sacrifice for 2 mana. Scry 1, then draw cards. They're very similar to clues. The 3 abilities are +1, up to 1 target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Whenever that creature deals combat damage this turn, return it to its owner's hand. -1, Nico Heiress deals 2 damage to target tapped creature for each card you've drawn this turn. And then -1, create a shard token. I like this card for a bunch of reasons. The first and best of which is that you don't need to deal with the X. You just play it for 3, and then you just make a shard token, and it's immediate value. The fact that you can draw this late game and it's going to scale up and give you like tons of cards. I think Alex and you and I talked about this is kind of similar to like a Sphinx's Rev in some level. It has that kind of feeling to it, but I also really love the flavor that this card kind of gives you of the +1, where of getting to bounce a creature back to your hand. I think it plays well with some of the cards in the set, but there's just so many good, cheap ETB effects in Modern's history that I love this card as just like a value planeswalker that makes all those cards really sweet. It's kind of doing, in some ways, like the payoff that Dovin, the 3-mana Dovin was giving you, where like you get the advantage for your creatures doming them, but like so much better. It's just so much better than that card, and I love that card.
Well, the fact that it's also unblockable, right? Like it not only is you get that creature to re-ETB, but that creature gets to attack for free. It's sad that this doesn't work with Wall of Omens, but that's, I guess, the world that I'm going to live in.
Works with Snapcaster Mage, though,
Does
right?
work with Snapcaster Mage, which is very spicy.
Yeah. Was this on either of your lists?
It is in my honorable mentions.
I definitely thought about it, and it didn't make my list, but I do think it's close. Yeah. I don't know. Something about it just doesn't seem quite there for me, but it's definitely very cool. I think the fact that like having to pay to crack the shards is a little awkward.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what I expect from a 3-mana Planeswalker. Don't get me wrong. I don't want this to be, 3-mana Teferi or anything. And I think it's really well designed and really cool, and I really want it to be good. But I don't know. Something about the shard tokens doesn't sit right with me.
That's fair.
In terms of modern, standard, it's going to be great.
I guess to this, I mean, like it maybe just should have been on my list instead of Orvar. But like enchantments ETBing do mean things. Like there are cards that trigger with that in ways that are interesting.
What's the coolest constellation card to play with Nico?
Draw cards, right? The green one, probably.
Black-white one that like drain the black-white one.
Yeah, I mean, but like, it's dirtily like. What's the constellation card that's going to kill them? I'm looking up constellation. Oh, you know what? That green dude. I wonder if that's going to be a thing in standard. You know the green dude I'm talking about, the 3-mana one.
The one that draws you a card.
Draw a card and put a counter on it.
Yeah. Yep. So tease in champion. That card.
I want some power and I want some toughness.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm going to look up all the constellation cards.
While you're doing that, I'm going to talk about the other things I like about this card. The fact that it doesn't have power and toughness. That is why it didn't also make it onto my list, and there's no way to kind of protect itself in any way. But they have scry 1, draw a card. Like they make better clues. Like these are, I would rather have a shard than a clue.
Yes, it's better than clues, but like the only card that makes clue gets played is Tireless Tracker, and it's because it's insane.
Yeah. It also has the beef. Now this has the cool unblockability feature, but
this does somewhat defend itself in that it can come down and immediately kill a creature if that creature is.
That is true. There is this has a removal spell feature. I think like it is similar to that card, but they are not as powerful, but they scale better. Coming like immediately down on turn 6 and just getting you 3 clues.
Archon of Sun's Grace makes a 2/2 flying Pegasus constellation.
That is spicy.
That's going to get played in standard for sure. There's going to be some sort of Yorion, Birth of Meletis, Nico, Archon of Sun's Grace, garbage pile.
That was already a blue-white control deck, right? Nico just gets put into that deck, and it's good. You could probably Yorion in Modern with Nico actually in a good shell, because you get the Scry enchantment too, and you get, All right, bye, Orvar. Nico's back on. Ben convinced me. They made it onto the list retroactively.
My number 8 is Rally the Ranks. 1 and a white enchantment. As Rally the Ranks enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. I think that there are perhaps not a lot of white tribal decks in standard, but this card very cheaply and efficiently undoes Plague Engineer, which I think is important for certain tribal decks. This does not help elves a lot. But in a super Plague Engineer heavy metagame, maybe you splash white in your elf deck for this. But like humans, for example, can struggle versus Plague Engineer. And I think that this is like a very clean answer to tribal decks that get hosed by Plague Engineer in particular. It's maybe more of a sideboard card because a 2-mana Anthem that doesn't have power or toughness, I think is not quite strong enough for Modern. But in a tribe like humans that is like really lacking anthems and is really going to get hosed by Engineer, this makes your like Champion of the Parishes enter and not immediately die. It makes your Thalia's Lieutenants enter the battlefield and not immediately die.
I think it's also really good in Soul Sisters, by the way, because they are all humans. And this
could also be another Soul Sisters card, but really like you're already getting +2/+2 from your Righteous Valkyrie, so you even need it.
Right. But that's 3 mana. This comes in before the Plague Engineer.
It's funny. This card to me was one of the first. This is one of those times where I looked at the card and I'm so used to the larger card pool of like Eternal formats, like Commander and the various other things that I just was like, oh, Shared Triumph. And then I was like, wait a minute, you can't play Shared Triumph in Modern. That's not a card that exists. But then I also like started thinking about all the like crappy 3-mana like Anthem type of effects. Not even crappy, like totally legitimate ones that have been printed over the last few years. There's like so many of them. And I'm always like, yeah, these cards are just never good enough. So I think your point is sound.
There's a 1 and a white, all white creatures get +1/+1 exist, right? That's a card.
Honor of the Pure.
Honor of the Pure exists.
Yeah,
and that does not
Pure,
see play in any of the decks we described.
There's not a mono white tribal deck in any format, really. And really, Soul Sisters, if it was such a problem, I think they would play that over Rally the Ranks anyway, because they have a bunch of rando non-humans.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Non-human, non-clerics. But I do think like there are tribal decks that do struggle with Plague Engineer, and I think this is going to be a sideboard card for those decks forever.
Yep. That's fair. My 8 is a spicy 8. And I wonder if either of you have it anywhere near any of your lists, even the honorable mentions. It is Reckless Crew. 3 red sorcery. Create X 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature tokens, where X is the number of vehicles you control, plus the number of equipment you control. For each of those tokens, you may attach an equipment you control to it. So I thought this card
Not to be confused with Rowdy Crew.
Correct. Very different. You would think this card is garbage, but then you would remember that the deck Cheerios is actually a thing that people do and is good, and that in Storm decks, they already play Empty the Warrens, and this card is Empty the Warrens for Cheerios. And then I was like, oh, this card is just as playable.
Didn't occur to me.
That's where I got
Wasn't on my radar.
My one rebuttal is that with Cheerios, you're playing like Retract.
But then you just
a lot of the time
play them again.
So like your storm count is much higher than your number of equipment in play.
Fair.
But it is cute that these like do get to like equip and stuff, because a lot of times you have all these like
Bone
equipments that cost 0
and,
with like a bajillion equip cost or whatever, and these like actually become legitimate threats because they're all like 2/4s or 3/1s.
You get an army of like 7 to 8 2/4s, and you're just like, okay, go opponent. And like obviously it's like Empty the Warrens. You don't play 4 Empty the Warrens in the main. You have like 1, and then you have a few in the side, and then you bring them in when Empty the Warrens is good. And I think Reckless Crew is the same potential in Cheerios decks. And I think Cheerios decks just keep getting better as they print more and more like red and white tutor cards for some reason, and like, you know, that world and like stuff that benefits from that. Like I think we will get another SRAM.
Yeah, for sure. And there's like other random equipment based card draw or equipment based value engines that they keep printing at low mana costs, like primarily for Commander, but like you get there with Cheerios.
My next card, my number 7, and I wonder how high this is on your lists. I wonder if it made your lists. Alex stone cold called this card. Saw it coming. It is blue 1, instant counter target spell, but it has Fortel. For Fortel. So you can put this in your exile face down for 2, and then you can cast it for blue 1 to counter target spell. I like this card for a bunch of reasons, for a whole bunch of reasons. I like this card because 2 mana is so much more significant than 3 mana in those blue-based control decks in Modern's history. Like, obviously, you've got all the Logic Knots of the world and things like that. But the fact that they can't interact with this card, they can't strip it out of your hand, it just sits there. So early on, you can just commit to this card just being face down. I don't even really care if you know that this card is this card, because probably when all is said and done in Modern, there'll be 1 or 2 Fortel cards that actually get played. So you'll see this and you'll know exactly what it is. But it doesn't matter. You can be playing a Grixis deck or anything with Liliana. You can discard your hand. It doesn't matter. It'll still just sit there. I think that this card in those decks is like the trump card, because it's like your extra counter spell that's not a card in your hand. You can loot, you can do all kinds of things. It doesn't matter. It sits there. I just like this card. I think this card's quite good. Maybe I'm overvaluing it, but I think it's very good.
Michael, I have a quick question. Is your next card a Fortel card?
There are no Fortel cards on my top 10.
Can I go, because my next card is a Fortel card, and then we can have a Fortel conversation, because this is my first Fortel card? All right. So I have things to say about that card, but then also this card. So let's just get them both out there, because I have a Fortel conversation to have, because it's really hard to evaluate. My next card is Dual Strike. Red instant. Whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, and then you can foretell it for 1 red. And similar to kind of what Ben was saying, being able to, in a Storm deck or any deck that's trying to copy their spells and go off, being able to, in the early game where you're just trying to draw cards and sculpt your hand to go off, foretell this, and then have Fork for 1 red available to copy any of your rituals or other things that are really powerful, I think is a very strong ability and move that Storm can take advantage of. Now, Fortel, your counter spell. Fortel is either insane or not good at all, and I can't tell. I cannot foretell how good Fortel is.
My gut feeling about Fortel, and this could be wrong the same way that either of your gut feelings about Fortel could be wrong, is that it's at a good power level. Clearly, it's like good for limited. But I feel like it's at a good enough powerful level for standard. Like all these cards that are clearly pushed Fortel cards are going to be great in standard. But I don't know if it gets there for Modern for me. I think paying 2 mana for nothing is not getting there for me.
I have another Fortel card on my list that I'll talk about a little later, but
sure.
This card in particular for me, I think that there's something to be said, and maybe we've been playing a little too much Commander recently, so I'm thinking about the power level of things like Wheel of Fortune, where I'm just like, I can foretell these sweet cards and then just like wheel away my hand. Like maybe I'm thinking like that. And time twisters and these cards that are not modern playable. But on the other hand, I just think that the idea of having a card that's not interactable, that's powerful and at a good rate is a good thing. I think it feels good. So I'm pretty sure this card's actually good, but I could be wrong.
I think with both of our cards, one of the benefits is that they're not unplayable on the front side. A Fortel card will not see play in Modern if it's not playable on the front side. The fact that Cancel is generally not playable, but I've definitely what's the blue counterspell? The Archmage's Charm. Like that's just counterspell when you cast that half of it, right? Like it's just
who among us has not hard cast a Force of Negation? You know, 3 mana conditional cancel. Oh, terrible! But you do it,
right?
You know,
right. Like sometimes
you have the mana, it's good.
Yeah, you have mana. You're not going to use it. They cast a spell. You don't want that spell to resolve. You're going to cast it. So the decks that want this effect are going to take advantage of cancel. And the question is turn 2 on the play is the moment for tell this, right? They're going to play their 2-drop. They haven't played a 1-drop. You're ahead. You have a moment where you're not going to do anything anyways. And maybe you don't have a 2-mana counter spell. Fine. But yeah, I think, and with dual strike, dual casting Manamorphose is the worst case scenario, and it's fine. It's just Manamorphose 2, and me doing it for 1 mana is bonkers. And Storm is a deck that on turn 2, I'm actually probably doing the most I'm doing is using Ponder, or not Ponder, but Serum Visions. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and there's other ones too. These are the 2 that I think that I was there's one third, the third one. I don't want to, if it's Ben's later card, I don't want to spoil it. And it is in my honorable mention, so I'll talk about it then. If we don't talk about it, it'll be interesting. It's possible that they're just really good. I do think there's a chance that enough of them will see play that you also do get enough of a surprise. They don't always know, especially depending on your deck. If you're in blue-white, it could be the board wipe, it could be the card draw one, it could be this, and then there's the clone one, right? There's 4 on the verge, so it'd be interesting to see.
They could see it coming.
Oh!
I personally evaluated it Fortel pretty low. I don't know if that's correct, but none of them made my list. I have 1 in my honorable mentions, but it's probably not a card you're foretelling very often.
Fair.
But we'll get there when we get there. My number 7 is Skemfar Avenger. Another elf tribal card. Is 1 in a black for a 3/1 elf berserker. Whenever another non-token elf or berserker you control dies, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. What's interesting about this card is it doesn't play the way that the elf decks that exist currently want to play. This is Undead Augur, which is a zombie tribal card, which I love. And I just think that it's really powerful for 2 mana because it gives you a card draw engine. What you need is a sacrifice outlet. And elf decks are currently not really doing that. But I think this opens up another avenue. You can use this chord of calling for it in response to a sweeper or whatever and draw a bunch of cards. Perhaps there is a new flavor of elves that is more interested in sacrificing elves to draw cards and make mana. And, you play an elf, you tap it to Heritage Druid to make mana, you sack it, you draw cards, you play more elves, you tap them for mana, you sack them, you draw cards. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this gets there, but the rate is good enough for me. And, there are elves in almost every Magic set. So I think this is a cool new direction for elves. And this is kind of an aspirational 7 in that I hope this gets there someday, if not today.
I'll jump the line here and say that my next card, once it rotates back to me, is actually Elvish Warcaller, which you already talked about.
Yeah.
And so I can respond to this by also talking about. Yeah. I just think it's a reasonable time to talk about both. I cut Avenger from my list. It was one of the last cuts. I like that card a lot. I think it's really cool. In my mind, a 3/1 for 2. I guess if it was a 1/1 for 2, maybe I would have looked at it a little different. I would have thought about the ability as more of the reason the card existed. But I thought about it as this is the aggressive black-green elf deck that wants to be attacking, and then this has your anti-wrath built into it. But what you're saying with sack outlets and stuff makes a little more sense.
Yeah. Well, and if there is an elf deck that's interested in Pyre of Heroes, for example, this is a good Pyre of Heroes target in that you can play 1, you can Pyre for it, or if you're Pyring a bunch, it draws you cards each time you Pyre. Maybe you can Pyre for a sack outlet. I don't know if there are any elf sack outlets in Modern, actually. I didn't look that up, but you get the idea.
So Warcaller, the reason I went with Warcaller over this is because to me, Warcaller feels more like the card that it just feels like the
Elvish
card
War Master.
War Master.
Right, yeah.
War Master feels like the card that when I'm playing against the elf deck, if I see it on turn 2, it just makes whatever they were going to do anyway that much better. It feels like the same exact play pattern. It's just now, like we talked about, now your Dwinnen's Elite is going to come down the next turn. It's going to make 2 elves. So now you're going to get 4 bodies if you don't already have one from turn 1, which even means if I'm like bolting stuff and removing stuff, you're still in a pretty good position. Not to mention the fact that we mentioned it's the mana engine or the mana sink, which those decks you always think about like, well, I hope they don't have their thing to like win the game with. It's just another card that I think just makes all of their turns a little more explosive, and it's cheap. It's a good rate. This just feels like it makes the cards that are already in that deck significantly better. I mean, like Elvish Visionary coming down, making a 1/1 and drawing a card. That seems really, really, really good.
I think these are both like real considerations. I do actually like Skemfar Avenger more than the green one, partially from a perspective of it shores up more of Elves' weaknesses, which are like board wipes and kind of getting wrecked by things that hate them and stuff like Plague Engineer and like a Plague Engineer coming down with this already in play, not it responding, and opens up other avenues, right? Like this creates engines that allows it to do stuff with sack outlets, do something on a more aristocrat-y level, which Elves kind of already plays like an aristocrat deck. It just like leaves the Elves it tapped in play, not doing anything, but it's like using everything it adds to gain value, draw cards, and like blocks by gumming up the board. And this just like increases that strategy.
Yeah, it does play awkwardly with Shaman of the Pack, because that's how Elves uses its tapped Elves, right? Is with Shaman of the Pack.
Right. And my one other worry with this card is that like you could just lose. Like Elves has a lot of Elves in play often and can gum up the board with a lot of creatures. And if they wipe the board and you have this in play, you could just take 12 and die.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like if you're playing this as Wrath Protection, yes. If you're playing this with Sacrifice Outlets, you just sack it.
Yeah. Correct. So Michael, what is your 6?
My 6 is Snakeskin Veil. It is a 1 green instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn. This is pretty much exclusively an infect card, but I think it's a good infect card. The thing that this does that Blossoming Defense doesn't do is it's better if you have to use it on your opponent's turn. Like a savvy opponent will try and remove your infects on their turn, because if you like go to kill a Glistener Elf on your opponent's turn when they go to attacks or whatever, Fatal Push it, they Blossoming Defense, well, now you're taking 2 extra poison. Now, if your opponent Fatal Pushes on their own turn, which is what they should do to avoid taking more damage from Blossoming Defense, well, you've now counteracted that by getting a counter. It also does protect your creatures from preemptive -1/-1s like Plague Engineer or something like that, if people are boarding them in against you. Yeah, the permanent +1/+1 I feel like is a cool option versus Blossoming Defense. Blossoming Defense does add to your explosiveness, but it's not like +2/+2 is like breaking the bank. You're really just playing it for the hexproof, and the pump is a nice bonus that fits into your game plan. So I think this is a good option.
I think I disagree
in
with you
that
on
slot.
that. The reason I didn't put it in on my list is because I think somebody who's played a lot of Infect and like a lot of Infect style decks in other formats, the velocity of the cards, because what you're playing is so weak in general, like what you're actually putting into your deck, like the power is so weak, you're kind of all in on this strategy. The velocity has to be pretty high of all the cards involved, and I actually think that the protection is good, and I think that what you're saying is totally great about it. It's very sound, but I do think that the +2/+2 is much more relevant than you're giving credit. I think the extra 1 point is the difference in swinging the game, especially in those games too, where like you don't just go all in and 10 them in one turn. You're like, okay, now the shields are down this turn, so I'll get in with my Inkmoth Nexus. Like, I'll get you to 1 infect, or I'll get you to that 3rd infect, so that I'll kill you on my turn. When you're doing that, I think the 1 point can be the make or break in the game. So I think Blossoming Defense I would still play over this card.
I think I'd play a mix of both.
Yeah. I think like there are matchups where the burst damage is going to be relevant, and there are other matchups where like the counter is going to be relevant, because you go like turn 2 elf and hold this up, they push, you put the counter, and now you've got a 2/2 infect, and you hit them 5 times and they die, and you defend yourself with counter magic or whatever. I mean,
yeah, I think it's a totally fair point, and I think that is one of the big that's one of the big constraints of those decks, those burst decks, is that you're not left with anything. So yeah, I'm with you. I also think that there are some decks that react like wanting you to have like a creature is made better by having a counter on it, or you're looking for ways to put more counters on things. So then this ends up being like a weird, interesting interactive card in other decks. That it's both a protection spell and like a build your creature spell.
Yeah, cool.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm gonna go with my number 6. My number 6 is Jorn, God of Winter, aka Jon Snow.
That's my number 5. So I can talk on this with you.
All right,
It's literally my next card.
And then Kaldring the Rhyme Staff, 1 blue and a black. Jorn is 2 and a green for whenever Jorn attacks, untap each snow permanent you control. It's a 3/3 legendary snow creature god. And Kaldring, the Rhyme Staff, is 1 blue black legendary snow artifact. You may tap it and play a snow permanent card from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped. So as we mentioned earlier, I think the fact that gods as a legendary permanent and the fact that they kind of act as 2 cards and they're in many ways split cards is like a versatility option that's really good. I think that a Sultai-based snow deck is going to be extremely controlling and play like a Jund deck, and Jorn is the kind of the type of value engine you're looking for that. And more specifically, like the Kaldring side, being able to rebuy things that you sack and get rid of is like very powerful. Having a repeatable Snapcaster Mage, or like it's like Kess, right? It's Kess for snow effects. You could play this with the Merit Liege enchantment that I'm not going to remember the name of.
Merit Liege's Slumber, is that what it's called?
Something like that. It's right there.
Yeah, there's other cards too. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Icebane Kotal is a snow creature, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and Jorn plays really nicely there. I think the other thing too, though, if you're playing all snowlands, like the backside of this card is sweet, but the front side of this card reads a lot like Najeela. Not really like Najeela, but like
Feast of Famine.
there's like a world in which it's just because it's when it attacks, it doesn't have to deal damage. Mm-hmm. It triggers on the attack. So there's a world in which we live, like where this untaps all your lands, and you have, some 5-color deck that wants to give you multiple attack steps, and you just win the game by having the right set of lands on the battlefield. So I think this card already kind of has the combo potential. Then the fact that the backside of it, if you're playing in like the all value Snowlands deck, even just the backside of this being an extra copy that you tap to just play a land from your graveyard every turn, that might just be enough.
Well, the second Jorn can be a staff that brings back the first Jorn.
Right.
Now you got a Jorn that you can just keep recasting if they kill it. So if you're really in the market for untapping your lands, the second Jorn just becomes a staff that gets back the first Jorn.
And this is the exact type of deck that's going to be playing Boreal Druids, so they come into play. Jorn can come down on turn 2 somewhat often. So like there's like cool cards. You get stuff like Frost Augur now.
Can if you have a duel, if you cast your Boreal Druid off a duel, although it would have to be a non-snow duel.
You also have like Cold Steel Heart,
yes.
If you want to really commit to this idea, right? You could be ramping.
I think Cold Steel Heart is definitely like worth playing. Icebane Kotal, as we mentioned, is really good. Like I think there's like legitimate, like a really cool blue, green, black snow deck, and there's like enough cards that like seem good in there and Jorn being this like very centerpiece, both ramp spell with the attack step, like double casting stuff, or on the back end being able to like use it as Snapcaster Mage, like just like him with counter magic is really good, right? Because you get to play something on your first main step, attack, and then counter whatever spell they have in their hand. And maybe, during your first main phase, you kill the creature in your way, you attack with Jorn, and then you untap your lands, and you just have good counter magic up, and then you can flash in Icebane Kotals. Like it plays like Feast of Famine, right? So like Snow, Feast of Famine, Snapcaster Mage, the same card seems really powerful to me.
That's my point, right? Is like the whole idea of what you said, Michael, about the front and the back interacting so well is where I think that this card's value really like this card may exist as its own engine to build an entirely new, really powerful deck. It just might be
Dead of Winter in your Sultai Snow deck.
Yeah, I'm going through snow cards in those colors, and there's like some sweet ones.
That's not a snow card. It is a plain old sorcery, but it's very good.
It is a snow tribal card.
Jorn did not make my list. I personally think that like the front side seems too fragile to me, and the back side seems too slow. And the fact that it's only permanence means you probably want to be putting cards in your own graveyard, which is not a problem. It's like a little bit of extra clunkiness added on to how slow it is, where it's like both halves are a 3-mana do nothing that you then need to like untap with to start getting value. And the staff's not that hard to untap with because it's an artifact, but like you untap with it and then what, in my mind. I do think the interaction where you get 2 of them is really cool and it's a good way to grind. But even then it's like, what's the payoff?
Like Jorn also untaps the staff, right? So like you get 2 triggers, and it untaps the thing the staff gets the first time. Plus you get 3 seasons, which is like the new Saga just as a decent graveyard hate. But like that lets you do the mill thing if you wanted to do something. I don't know. There's like cool stuff.
I think that's a card you're supposed to play in the same deck as Jorn in whatever format you're playing Jorn in.
Next card.
So Jorn was my next card, so that already covered me. So Michael, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is Goldspan Dragon. This card is so cool. All right. Again, like my list is definitely influenced by what I think is cool, but also good.
That's definitely an honorable mention for me that I seriously considered putting on my list. So
Okay. It's a 3 red 4/4 dragon. Flying haste. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. Treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. So it is a treasure tribal card. It also makes treasures when it attacks and makes treasures when it gets targeted. So in my mind, this is like a Teferi because it's a 5-drop, right? Oh, 5-drop in Modern, that's never going to make it. But Teferi makes it because he untaps your lands and allows you to do something immediately on your opponent's turn. This card allows you to do something literally immediately before your opponent even gets a turn. If you play this and your opponent immediately goes, Path to Exile on it, it triggers, you get a treasure, and you can use your treasure to counter their spell with Remand or with Mana Leak or something. That's what you can do if they target immediately. If they don't target immediately, you attack, you get a treasure, you can use it on your second main to play a creature or whatever.
Or counter Remand whatever they try playing on their next turn. Same as Teferi.
Yeah, it also works with other treasures if you have other treasures lying around. I don't think there's a ton of modern playable treasure cards, but it does synergize with like that new dwarf.
I will be talking about it by the end of this experience.
There you go. So it buffs other treasures. So like as soon as it hits the battlefield, all your other treasures are twice as good. Treasures you have lying around from previous Goldspan dragons perhaps now get better. Yeah, I think the Teferi aspect of it is very cool. Now, it is a 4/4 flying haste, more like a win condition for your blue-red X control deck versus a Teferi, which is like a card draw engine that also wins the game. So I'm not saying it's as good as Teferi, but it has a similar enough play pattern that I'm pretty interested in it. And it's like more proactive in that it kills them fast or it pressures their planeswalkers fast. This is a card that starts ending the game. It also actually ramps you if you untap with it. You have 5 mana, you attack, you get a treasure. If you get to untap with it, you attack again, you get another treasure. Now you have 10 mana.
I think this card's really sweet. I like all the idea of, I wish that there were more free spells. I built a list immediately that was all like mutagenic growth and like and gut shots and like lava darts and all of the things I could do.
I wasn't even thinking about targeting it yourself. But yes, you can do that. And like I said, Frank Karsten did have a combo with this. It's a 1 mana enchantment, 1 mana aura that you can pay 1 to return it to your hand. So you like...
Yes, Crown of Flames, I think it's called. Is that right?
So do you go infinite? No, you just get infinite triggers.
So you get infinite storm. And then you can use the last treasure to cast Grape Shot.
Got it.
I think it's called Crown of Flames. I think it's 1 red. And it's like a fire breathing enchantment for 1 red that for 1 red you can return it to your hand, I think.
So that card I don't believe is in Modern. Yeah, it's from Invasion. But the card he was talking about was a blue card. It was like Shimmering Wings or something. It's from 10th edition.
Yeah, that's fair.
Shimmering Wings from 10th edition. Enchanted creature has flying and you can pay a blue to return it to its owner's hand. But the treasure makes whatever color you want, so you can make blue with it easy. And then the last treasure, once you have Storm Count, you can cast Grape Shot. That's not how I'm advocating using this card, but if you wanted to do that, you could.
I love this card. I don't have my list, but it is because I actually didn't realize it was also when it attacks. I thought it just was when it gets targeted by your opponent's spells, not even that you could target it. I didn't read the first ability correctly. This card is gas and is like your Teferi comparison is spot on. And you don't need it to have treasure. Because before I was like, okay, this is great in Commander. I'm going to use it with Dockside Extortionist. I'm going to win the game every time. In Modern, I just didn't realize this first ability just really does. It gives you the 2 mana you need to now protect this, and you domed them for 4.
It's a win con that protects itself. It doesn't protect itself in that it has some inherent ability to protect itself, or it
gives you
it just protects itself in that you can tap out for this safely and not have to worry about it getting killed. You can just start beating them up and be proactive. Not proactive, but you can be reactive with counter spells while you have this on the battlefield.
And you can react to their remove. If you cast this and they pad to exile it, you get the treasures first to be able to counter it before their path resolves. So I think
then you get to attack and you get 2 more mana.
This card's fire. Next, We're on number 5. I've got Burgi, God of Storytelling, and the Horn on the other side that I don't actually know.
That's the green. Is that the green one that we talked?
No,
that's
it's
not
the red
That
one.
is
the
the
red
red
one.
god.
That's
2 red, 3/3. Whenever you
Her
cast
backside is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty.
Harnfell, Horn of Bounty. The front side is Tuna red. Whenever you cast a spell, add red mana. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. I plan on, well, I guess I play Arena. And Limited will play of this format, but I honestly don't think that'll ever be relevant in my life. Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, 4 and a red, legendary artifact. Discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. This is another Storm card. Plus just really good card. Every spell you cast makes a red mana. That's the Electromancer effect that then on the other side, when you draw 2 of them, lets you discard those land cards you don't want to draw 2 cards. One of them, 1.5 of them are probably good. This card's nuts. How did this horn get printed? Luckily, it doesn't just let you go through your whole deck. That was a take I saw on the internet. It was like, oh, this card would be way better if it drew you 2 cards. I was like, yes. That would be the best card draw 5 drop ever printed, and would be banned immediately. But sure,
Card's really good. It didn't actually make my list.
It's in my honorable mentions. I think being 3 mana makes it much harder to play in place of Goblin Electromancer, but the backside is very relevant because if you need a Goblin Electromancer to set up, it does that. If you're already going off and you're starting to fizzle, you play it on the backside. It does that too. Also, it's any spell, not just instant or sorcery, which is relevant. And the fact that it makes red mana can be relevant as well, instead of Goblin Electromancer just giving a discount.
Yep.
So it goes infinite with Grinning Angus. The one where it's a 3-drop 2/2 that you can pay a red to return it to your hand and add 3 mana from Future Sight.
Future Sight, baby.
Ben? You would know. It's a
that and Storm Entity were the 2 red uncommons, similar spot.
Yeah. So it goes infinite with that in a way that Goblin Electromancer doesn't. I don't know that there is a Storm deck that wants to do that over just traditional Storm, but I do think the Horn is very appealing as a backside to this because drawing too many Goblin Electromancers is not good.
Right.
Never.
Also, any deck, whether it's Storm or not, any deck that's looking to play a lot of spells and really add a lot of mana with this card is gonna flood out because you're playing all these rando cantrips. You're see land on top, scry to the bottom. Oh, I got another land. Serum Visions, draw a land. Scry 2. Okay, now I get to anytime you're playing a lot of cantrips in any deck, be it a Kiln Fiend deck or Prowess or whatever, you're gonna end up with a lot of lands in your hand that you can't do anything with. And this Horn just lets you pitch them all and turn them into gas at a 2-for-1 rate, which is a good rate.
Yep. the fact that also I would even try this in Jund, right? This is the front half is a 3 mana 3/3 that you Bloodbraid into is great and fine, and you playing this on curve on 3 after you Thoughtseize them and play a beater is it doesn't do a lot, but you untap with it and you're kind of ahead. All of your Thoughtseizes and removal spells generating mana can get you ahead. And then the back end of this is what Jund wants in life, just being able to outvalue your opponent when you're both in top deck mode and you're just I drew land. That's 2 new cards is something I would just be interested in, and it's so hard to get rid of. I really like this card. I think it's really cool.
It is a discard outlet that digs you for your combo pieces. So if you're in the market for that, I mean, you can literally just pitch your hand and draw
10 cards
10 or whatever.
Yeah.
Hope I find a reanimate. All right.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.